Hi.
Hi, it's Natasha and Ray here, and we are here today to talk to you about service accommodation. What is it, and what are the pros, what are some of the cons, and is it worth it?
So, a little bit of background for those of you who don't know us. We have a diverse property portfolio of buy-to-lets, service accommodation, and HMOs. We've been doing service accommodation for the last 2 years in Essex and Suffolk. So, we wanted to share our experiences of our apartments and houses with you and some considerations for those who are wanting to get started in the strategy themselves.
So, what is serviced accommodation? In short, service accommodation is really short-term stays, and we accommodate those people in flats or houses, and you could own those houses or flats, or you could do something called rent to rent, where you basically rent them from a landlord, and with permission, you then service them out for short-term stays. So that should be short-term stays for literally one night, or it could be several months. It's different to normal rentals, as instead of having tenants, you have guests. So these could be holiday makers, they could be people visiting family and friends, they could be corporate, so therefore coming for work. So you have a vast range of different people and coming to stay at the property.
With that being said, there are a lot of pros and cons with regards to service accommodation. So, just looking at a few of the pros, one of the main reasons we actually got into service accommodation was that we have guests and not tenants. So, this is really appealing to us, even though we do have tenants ourselves. The great thing about guests is they are treated very differently and do not have the same rights as a tenant does. So, they have the rights to occupy the property, they have the rights to stay there, and they pay up front, which is amazing.
So another pro is that you can make more money using this strategy than some of the other ones, which is always a good thing. So you could make anything from say £500 up per month per property as a cash flow, or you can on some months you can make way more than that.
So the good thing about that as well, being the £500 per month, is that it's just generally from what would be a normal buy to let if you want it to be. So with a normal buy to let, you might be looking at £150 to £200, but whereas if you can turn that into a service accommodation unit, you're making a lot more money, and you don't have to do much to the property. Basically, just furnishing it slightly differently, and you're not having to kind of change or reconfigure the whole property like you would with a HMO, where you might be putting in fire doors, fire systems, en suites, in order to cater to both the regulations, the council's needs, and the tenants' requirements as well.
So yeah, generally there's less money needed in order to set it up. So moving on to another pro is that you don't actually need to even own the property to do this strategy, which is another great thing about it. So you could do something called rent to rent, which is basically where you rent the property from a landlord and then obviously with permission, then rent it out as serviced accommodation, which means that you can actually start earning money much quicker from this strategy compared to if you were to go and buy a property to do it in.
Another pro is that you can actually get someone to manage it for you. So some of you might be thinking you want to get into this strategy yourself, but you have a day job and how you're going to deal with guests along the way. So you can get someone to manage it in your area if there is someone, or if there's not, you can always create that new income stream as a kind of management company for other service accommodation providers. But if you do want to manage it yourself, you can automate as much of it as you want. So you can be as hands-on or as hands-off as you want, communicating with the guests, meeting the guests, or having processes in place where they just kind of deal with it all automatically as well.
So now moving on to some of the cons.
So with service accommodation, it can be seen as a bit of a riskier strategy. So some of you may have seen or may have not. There's basically like a property strategy pyramid with regards to the different strategies and how risky they are. So at the bottom you have your buy-to-lets, HMOs, service accommodation, conversions, builds. And other strategies kind of slot into there depending on what they are. Service accommodations kind of sits in the middle, a bit riskier, and that is because it can have different variables that you can't always predict. So it can be that, such as COVID, no one knew that was coming. That obviously affected a lot of the property market. But with service accommodation, there can be like guests can cancel last minute. They can shorten their stay. There can be lots of different things that can come up that you can't predict, and that makes it a bit more riskier. And the kind of income is not as guaranteed as it would be with, say, a normal buy-to-let. Although that can be risky as well in terms of guests don't always pay there as well.
So moving on from that one to very closely to this next one is that there can be peaks and there can be troughs, which is probably why it's deemed to be riskier. So some months you could do really well and potentially even like double what you maybe thought you might get when you were doing your figures. And that's often maybe more to do like in the summer where people are having lots of holidays and using the apartments more, or maybe around Christmas time,
Yeah.
where they're kind of visiting family. And then there'll be like the troughs where it maybe just breaking even and you've just got enough guests to just cover all the costs. So it's quite hard to know or rely on that money for your salary potentially, if you were potentially thinking of using it to replace, say your income, because there are some months you do much better than others, which is often also why having more than one SA to support each other is really beneficial.
So another con is one that a lot of people actually worry about when they're thinking about getting into service accommodation. When they see kind of horror stories about this strategy is when there's been parties or troublesome guests. You're only ever going to see bad news and you look for it. But this is one that we have experienced ourselves. So the guests can be having parties, they can cause damage. So we've had guests who've had parties, we've had guests who have stolen things from our apartments. And you can mitigate them as much as possible, but there's always going to be an element where it can happen. And you should be prepared that it could happen as well. So having the right insurance in place, getting deposits from the guests, and just knowing that it can happen along the way. The things they steal are not always what you expect, such as we had a Hoover go one time.
Yeah, and they saw like the toaster and the kettle and
left
bedding.
a card saying like, good luck in your new house. So we were like, well, clearly you've taken that for that reason.
But they left the TV.
They did, and we was going to replace some of those items as well. So we was a bit like, okay, fair enough. If you want to use that Hoover that's actually on its last legs, that's fine. But yeah, it can happen. So it's just being prepared that can happen.
But I think that's probably the most in terms of costly, like damage or no, we've never had anyone, thankfully, at the moment that's actually trashed.
No, thankfully not. We know it can happen, but no one's had bad enough party where they've done that and stuff. And again, when we try and mitigate parties by having longer stays, and the deposits often put people off, but yeah, thankfully we've never had some of the stories that we have heard other people have as well.
Yeah, we do often, because we take deposits, we'll send an automated email out which will say we'll contact you for deposit, and then
they'll cancel automatically straight away. 5 minutes later. 5 minutes after they booked, so you're like, that was probably someone trying to have a party. So yeah, there are ways to avoid and get rid of them, but it's not always guaranteed as well.
So another con is that it's quite subjective in terms of the people that stay there. You can get people who absolutely love it, literally like the best place they've ever stayed, and then there's someone, the next person that comes in, it's the same apartment or house, and they're literally they might comment or leave a review saying, you know, warning, do not go here, and you're just like, what? So I think that can be a con in terms of the kind of the peaks and troughs of just general people, and how you can have some great people and then some people you just think, oh my gosh, I wish that you would just go away.
And sometimes you won't even know they've had a bad experience, so we send out automated messages to ask how their stay's been. A lot of guests come back and tell us, and we're grateful for that feedback as well. Sometimes you don't hear anything, and then like a month later they'll leave bad feedback and you're trying to remember, what stay was this? So yeah, it's just taking it with a pinch of salt and knowing it can come along the way. It can be hard, sometimes you feel like you've been attacked, but trying not to let that happen along the way.
And obviously we put so much time and effort into trying to make them like the best they can be, and sometimes you just can't anticipate what people are gonna find or not like. So we had somebody complain because they found a spider in one of the rooms. Like, how can we prevent that?
No.
So yeah, there are lots of things that people will want in a property that maybe we don't have. Like we had a coffee making machine, we got marked down because we didn't have a coffee making machine. But unless everyone comments that they wish they had a coffee making machine. And
sometimes that feedback can be useful as well, because you'll be like, okay, brilliant, I'm going to implement that, I'll add that into each of my properties. But it depends on whether you want to add that in, because we've not had other guests who've really needed that. Even though we provide tea and coffee, they've not really needed a coffee machine. We haven't added that into our properties since, because no one else has ever commented on that. The final con is that you can't really predict when you are going to be needed, or kind of how much you're going to be needed as well. Like I said before, some guests will contact you, feedback to you, some you won't hear from as well. One of the things that often happens for us is we send out all the check-in details, give them everything they need, and then they'll call us being like, how do I get in? And they've been like, oh yeah, I saw your email, I didn't open the attachment. So you just can't prepare for that. Sometimes we've had people call in the middle of the night because they've turned up really late, and again, they've not read the instructions. It generally can be that someone just hasn't read something, but you just can't prepare. It tends to be probably when we're having some sort of family outing that
We're just
I
about
tend
to
to,
eat dinner.
the phone tends to ring.
Oh.
Remember, we was having a family barbecue for Natasha's dad's birthday, and I don't think I actually sat down and ate with them because each time I went to sit down, the phone rang. Whereas the rest of the week, it probably didn't ring, so it just happens to be when you least expect it. So you just can't prepare for that.
So that's the con of managing your own.
That
ones.
is. But obviously, if you get someone else to manage it, your phone's not going to ring. You're just going to get feedback from them. But obviously, you're giving up some of the income for that as well. I wanted to give a few top tips as well for anyone looking to get started in service accommodation. So one of the big ones is if you have an area in mind, or if you're not too sure and you're looking at a few different areas, you really want to assess the demand to make sure there is a good demand for your property type in that area, whether it be you're looking to let by the room or by the whole property. So there's a few different sites you can look on. The first one to go to is just a site called AirDNA. It's completely free to go on. Just gives you a general overview of the area, kind of puts on a map all the different properties from Airbnb and Verbo of where they are in the area and what the general occupancy was in a couple of different months for comparison. And what you want to do is then you want to go on different sites like Airbnb and Booking.com and look at all the different properties, look at whether they've got people staying this week, next week, the next month, 3 months. You really want to get a feel, is there demand going forward for the next few months to satisfy whatever you feel comfortable with to take that step into that strategy.
So another top tip is making sure you've got the right teams and the right processes in place. So obviously, as we said, you can get somebody else to manage everything for you and you don't have to play a part in that at all. But then what we don't like is the fact that you're putting it in someone else's hands, trying to fill the rooms or the apartments. We like to have that control to make sure that we're pushing it as much as possible so that we ultimately make as much money from that apartment as we can, basically making sure it's ideally 100% occupied. So it just means that really you need to make sure that you've got the right processes in place, you've got things that are automated, you know what needs to be sent out and when. And I think the most important thing is making sure you've got the right teams in place. So for us, our clean team is vital, that they are our eyes and our ears and that they feed back to us what's going on in that property, because we don't have the time to go after every stay to go and check it out. So we get them to send videos of their cleans, and if there's anything that's a bit untoward that we need to see, so we've got evidence for. So we did have a clean team in the past that they were a great clean team, but they were just a clean team because that's what they were used to doing, was just cleaning houses. So if there was a light bulb that was maybe not working, or something that was missing, they wouldn't let us know, and then unfortunately the guest would then maybe complain that something had broken or wasn't there. Whereas this the maintenance and clean team that we've got it's actually that, a maintenance and clean team in one. So they will report any issues, so we can pick them up and get them sorted before the next guest arrives.
One thing I want to pick up on there as well is Natasha said about trying to get 100% occupancy as well. One of the things I hear a lot of people asking me is, what's your occupancy like in your property? And your occupancy means nothing if you aren't charging the right rates. You could have 100% occupancy but being charged at 50% what you should be charging, and you're not actually making any profit. So don't take occupancy as a good sign as making the right profit. You want to have both together, good occupancy, charging the right rate, and that's where you're going to make all your money from along the way. The final thing the top tip we want to give is to stress test your property. So you should always do this in any property strategy, and service accommodation is no different. So we always recommend stress testing your property at 50%. If you've only got 50% of your month occupied, does it break even? If it doesn't, what's the kind of picture looking like? For us, we have a minimum we want to make or lose, but you really want to make sure that picture is painting the right one for you.
And we do 50% because that would be a bad month.
Yes, it would.
The average, I think, is 72%.
Something like that across the UK.
Across the UK, so a 50% would be a poor month. So if you're doing well, or when I say doing well, is in you're not losing money at 50%, then to us that's a good deal.
Yes.
So that leads to the question of: is it worth it? Is it worth doing SA or service accommodation?
So for us, we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't think it was, but we say definitely it is, but with consideration. So obviously we've mentioned a few pros and cons there as well. So you need to consider whether, one, you have the time to kind of start building these processing yourself, or you want to get someone to manage it, considering kind of your position in terms of whether you've got other kind of properties to support yourself, considering the other risks that come with it, where it's a bit more of a risky strategy due to the variables, and just knowing that it can be a bit more hands-on along the way.
So we hope you have found that useful.
Yes.
If you have any questions, we're happy to help, so feel free to get in contact.
Yes. Take care.